I heard you up against our boy Julian on this Liam Foyle malarkey.
Oh, is it so? Our boy?
I'm serious, Will. I've seen the brief. Why are you doing it?
I'm practicing law.
Oh, come on. Why do you do it?
Because everyone deserves a defense.
I send you a card. I hope that
You're defending him.
If you mean Liam Foyle, then yes. Yes, you're correct. What can I say? Everyone deserves a defense.
In London, a brilliant criminal barrister named William "Will" Burton lives with his wife Kate and young son James Jamie in a luxury apartment. Dubbed a workaholic by his loved ones, Will is known for carefully reviewing each of his cases and spending time working out the best defense for his clients. This tremendous effort is proven in court, as Will has never lost a single case in his career, earning him the respect of his peers, who encourage him to apply for Queen's Counsel and claim his well-deserved place among the elite. One morning, Will goes to his son's school for career day and tells Jamie and his classmates about his job. Fascinated by the description, the young boys quiz Will on how he can prove a person's innocence in court and are thrilled by his explanation of innocent until proven guilty, as if they have just discovered a new loophole to cover for their daily mischief. Then, a curious boy asks Will what happens if he defends a guilty person and sets him free, and leaves the experienced Will, who tries to find a way to describe reasonable doubt to the boy to no avail, speechless. Then, Will rushes to court for a trial in which he goes up against his old classmate Maggie, who spent her whole career in his shadow, successfully defends his ambulance driver Vadim, and is congratulated by his colleague Gavin while the grateful client thanks him profusely. Will heads back to the office where his excited colleagues inform him that he has been named the top barrister in the country, with Maggie a close second. Utterly proud of him for achieving such an unprecedented feat as a junior barrister and bestowing the honor upon their chambers, his colleagues once again urge him to apply for Queen's Counsel, something he's been reluctant to do despite his excellent track record in winning cases. Seemingly persuaded by his new ranking, Will finally starts considering it seriously and makes the necessary preparations. While annoyed to once again come second to the great Will despite her hard work and commitment, Maggie ruminates over the rankings for the rest of the afternoon. A few days later, Will prepares to head home to spend a weekend away with his family, and just as he proceeds to leave, he receives a file from a well-known solicitor named Peter, who requests Will's expertise over all the senior silks in the chambers. Seeing his hesitation, Gavin and his friend Danny urge Will to take the file and review it, making a point that if any of them were in a legal bind, they would want his expertise over any other barrister. Reluctantly, Will takes the file and leaves his office to meet Kate at Jamie's football game, where he passionately cheers his son on. After the game, the Burtons return to their luxurious apartment, where they pack their things to go to their cottage for the weekend. At the cottage, the family has fun, enjoys each other's company, and spends some quality time together. Will and Kate then put an exhausted Jamie to bed and head to their room, where Kate tells her husband how impressed Jamie's friends were by his presentation at school, and, after sharing how proud she is of him, begs him to stop overworking himself and minimize his stress. However, this plea backfires as the mention of his job suddenly reminds Will of the case file he's been asked to read. Still reluctant, Will opens it to review and is shocked to his core to see gruesome pictures of a young medical student named Sandra, who had been found brutally murdered, and learn the horrific ordeal she had gone through before she was strangled to death. As he continues going through the files and learning more about the tragic case, certain that there are more experienced barristers better equipped to handle the complex case, Will wonders why he was chosen to review the files and visits Peter at his office to speak to him about it.
Because in a case like this, I want someone who spends days elbows deep in the evidence. Because you win. Stands between a rock and a bucket of shit. And he needs all the help he can get.
Will spends the next few days buried deep in the case and studying it from every angle possible. However, despite his years of practice in the criminal justice system, in which he had mistakenly believed he had seen everything, Will cannot handle the fact that Sandra had been alive during most of the torture she had endured, and wonders what kind of a monster would do such a thing to a fellow human being, which brings him to a standstill. Forcing himself to move past this and focus on the legalities, Will reminds himself that everyone deserves a defense, which is the core belief that guided him to the profession he cherishes so dearly, pushes everything else out of his mind, and together with Peter, goes to meet the accused, Liam Foyle. During his session with his client, Will tries to build a plausible scenario for the mounting evidence against Liam. First, Liam tries to explain the blood found on his client's clothes and shoes and works up a story in which Liam had gone on a walk around the area where the victim had been murdered, saw the blood when he had gotten home, assumed he had stepped on an animal carcass, and didn't pay much attention to it. As Will and Liam discuss this, Peter, who's also trying to prepare his client for the numerous questions the defense might throw at him, sits in the corner and asks him different questions, which seems to annoy him. Suddenly, without any provocation, Liam blatantly announces how much he hates people and admits that he's not a good person, but assures his team that he had nothing to do with the murder. However, the longer the session goes, and Will studies Liam closely, the more he is convinced that something isn't right, and is certain that his client is capable of anything. Despite this, Will feels like he has no choice but to uphold his responsibilities as Liam's lawyer, and continues discussing the case with him. This leads Will to Liam's credit card history, which shows payments made to adult websites featuring violent and depraved content that showcase similar acts of aggression as those endured by Sandra. At the mention of this, Liam confidently declares once more that the evidence is not real and he had nothing to do with what happened to Sandra. Then, out of nowhere, Liam becomes enraged by Peter's attempts to prepare him for the upcoming trial, and, disregarding Will's advice to listen to his solicitor, he throws him out of the room, asks Will to bring him some tea, and prepares for a private discussion with the barrister.
Refreshing. Let's hope so. Your manners.
If you privately confessed your guilt to me in any way, but publicly maintained your innocence,
The more time we spend together, the more you remind me of me.
and I would have encouraged you as I left to enter a guilty plea.
I'm not guilty. Look me in the eye.
Order to
You
do
think I did it, don't you? That's the problem here.
That's not what I'm saying.
At the end of the session, Will, who has studied Liam's calm and ominous appearance closely, ignores Peter, who's waiting outside to discuss the case, runs out of the building to get some fresh air, as if he had been suffocating with the chilling tone and blank face of his client. A few days later, at an office party, Maggie approaches Will, who's enjoying himself with Kate, and after telling him that she is looking to take up more defense roles like his, asks him why he would take such a hopeless case as Liam's and starts to come up with her own theories. Unfazed, Will assures his colleague that he's just doing his job and leaves. Why are you obsessed with Will, Maggie? A couple of days later, Kate and Will throw Jamie a birthday party and invite his friends over to the apartment. However, despite trying his best to be present and enjoy the celebration with his family, Will spends most of the time discussing the evidence of the case with his computer forensic expert and urging him to finalize his evaluation and prepare it for trial. A couple of weeks later, on the first day of the trial in court, the prosecution team led by Julian QC presents a detailed account of the grisly injuries that Sandra had endured before her death and calls upon forensic experts followed by witnesses who had discovered her body to testify just how horrific the murder was. Then, hoping to show just how violent Liam is, Julian calls a bank manager who testifies that his bank had issued Liam the credit cards with which he had purchased the membership to the adult sites that gave him access to depraved content. Once the prosecution rests, Will informs the judge that his forensic computer expert is not finished compiling his findings and asks him to review the request he had submitted for an adjournment. Annoyed by this bold request, the judge reminds Will that there's great interest from the public to get justice for the poor victim, refuses the request, orders him to get on with the case with what he has, and calls for recess. That night at the apartment, Kate finds a sleepless Will in Jamie's room, lovingly watching his beloved son sleep and making plans to secure their home further so that they can protect their family from such dangers. The next day, before trial, Will privately speaks to Liam, who angrily scolds him for his lack of preparation. Unfazed by this, Will reminds Liam that he can fire him if he's not happy with his work, secretly hoping he will take the suggestion and free him of the overwhelming task. Unfortunately, this doesn't go as planned, and taken aback by the response, Liam apologizes and promises not to interfere anymore. Then, during trial, Will questions the prosecution's forensic computer expert named Dr. Crow and soon manages to establish that Liam's credit card information could have been stolen by unknown third parties to access the websites, and that they can never be used to show whether Liam had personally watched the content, creating reasonable doubt in the prosecution's case. Outraged, Julian tries to remind the court that the case is not about the disturbing adult content, but about the murder of an innocent woman, but fails to make a point. The judge, who who has recognized the damage Dr. Crow's testimony has done to the case, excuses the jury and takes both Julian and Will to his chambers to speak to them. There, before the judge can say anything, seizing the opportunity, Will informs him that since the allegations of the disturbing adult content have already leaked to the press, who were quick to give the story massive coverage and declare his client guilty, the jury cannot be trusted to make a fair judgment. Citing this, Will asks for a stay of indictment. To Julian's utter horror, the judge agrees with this point, declares a stay of indictment, and frees Liam. Furious by this decision, the jury lash out at Will for helping a murderer walk free. Despite winning the impossible case, Will feels empty inside, as his gut tells him that he may not have been on the right side this time. Despite this, Will politely accepts Peter's gratitude. And, after explaining to Liam that he only did his job in exploiting the defense's weakness to set him free, he refuses to shake his hand and leaves. That night, at the apartment, Kate sees Jamie, who is playing on the balcony, waving to someone down on the street, and becomes curious and rushes out to check who her young son is communicating with. To make it more alarming, Jamie explains that a stranger, who has since disappeared, was waving at him. Spooked, Kate rushes her son inside and locks up for the night. A few days later, while Will attends a reunion, Kate and Jamie head out to the cottage where they enjoy a peaceful evening. Later, Kate does a home pregnancy test, is excited to find out that she's pregnant, and decides to surprise her husband later. However, that night, while taking a bath, Kate is shocked out of her mind to see Liam watching her through the bathroom window and frantically calls Will. Terrified by this, Will tries to calm Kate, asks her to call the police, and speeds to the cottage. There, Will is relieved to find his family safe, and while securing the perimeters with the help of the police, finds a mysterious balloon in the backyard, as if someone was taunting him. The next day, at his office, hoping to identify the perpetrator, Will speaks to a detective.
Is it possible that one of your ex-clients has a point to prove?
Detective Chalmers, Mr. Burton has never lost a case.
Have you ever refused to represent someone?
We're not really allowed to do that. Well, no.
Later, Will is advised to delay his silk application and informed that Liam had made a formal complaint about him, accusing him of professional misconduct, detailing that while working as the defense barrister, Will doubted the validity and honesty of his plea. Flabbergasted by the accusation, Will reminds his colleagues that he had won Liam's case against all odds and is glad to see them stand by him and plan to spend the evening working out a way to counter the accusations that can potentially ruin his career. Is this how you thank the man who got you your freedom? Will then calls his wife to update her about the ordeal and informs her that he will be working late. Despite being disappointed, Kate understands Will's predicament, plans to go to the cottage with Jamie and wait for him there, and informs him that she has a surprise to show him when he gets back. Later, after finishing up at the office, Will heads to the cottage and is terrified to find Kate's car, whose door and trunk are left open. Alarmed, Will proceeds to the house, finds it completely dark, and as he rushes in calling his wife's name, he finds her bloodied, lifeless body on the floor. Shocked to his core, Will rushes to her side, screaming at the top of his lungs to check on her, and is devastated to learn that it's too late. Before he can process this tragedy, Will suddenly sees a stoic Liam standing outside the window, ominously looking at him, and loses his mind in sheer terror and rage. Soon, Will hears his son's voice calling out for him, follows it, and finds the terrified young boy hiding in a chest. Once he gets Jamie out, a devastated Will calls the police, who quickly arrive on the scene. Afterwards, while a heartbroken Will and Jamie attend Kate's funeral, the police arrest Liam. Will's colleagues assure the devastated barrister that they will do everything they can to get justice for Kate. Later, Will learns that Liam has appointed Maggie as his defense barrister, goes to see her, and becomes annoyed when she reminds him that everyone deserves a defense. Jamie spends the next few days haunted by the traumatic loss and wakes up most nights screaming at the top of his lungs, desperately calling for his father, who rushes by his side. Meanwhile, Peter and Maggie meet with Liam to discuss the case, and Liam reveals that he has an alibi for the time in question, as he was having dinner with his neighbor, Eileen. Discarding each of Liam's eerie comments, Maggie tries to focus on preparing the best defense for him, but becomes alarmed as she sees him reveling in the fact that Will, who's considered a witness in the case, cannot play any part in the prosecution and will be forced to watch from the sidelines. Concerned by this, Maggie returns to her office later, goes over the gruesome crime scene pictures, and starts to get cold feet about defending a man accused of committing such a grisly crime to someone she personally knew. However, soon, her colleague reminds her that winning this high-profile case will be her only way to get out of Will's shadows and make a name for herself, which gives her the motivation she needs to go on. At the chamber, after frantically collecting evidence and studying the case, Will's colleagues Richard and Trevor step up to lead the prosecution and employ everyone's help in building the best case possible. One afternoon, Will discreetly meets with Danny, who informs him that the evidence from the crime scene doesn't add up, and the team is waiting for DNA evidence. He then gives him detailed information about Eileen, whom Will soon starts following around town to a storage unit. The next day, at the arraignment in court, Liam pleads not guilty. Following this and the lack of substantial evidence on the prosecution's side, Maggie files a bail application, which the judge grants. Confident in her case, Maggie then schedules the trial in a couple of weeks, completely undermining the prosecution, who appear quite unprepared and out of their depth. Within moments, Eileen posts Liam's bail, and he is once again released. Then, Liam catches up with Maggie in the parking lot, ominously thanks her for her service and shakes her hand to show his appreciation. While a spooked Maggie speeds away, Liam meets Eileen, whom he thanks for posting his bail and looking after his birds, and heads home. Meanwhile, hoping he will be better off among his friends, Will takes Jamie to school and heads to the chambers to find another case and distract himself with it. Later, Will learns that Liam's been released, panics thinking about his son's safety, and as he rushes to his school, learns that Jamie has left with his friend, Alfie. While a terrified Will frantically tries to locate his son, unaware that Liam is closely following them, Jamie and Alfie take the bus home. After Alfie gets off, Liam takes a seat next to Jamie and calmly stares at him, as if to check if the young boy recognizes him from the fateful night, and is relieved to see no reaction. Later, to the delight of Will, who vows to always pick his son up from school, Jamie returns home safe and sound. The next evening, Will finds Jamie, who misses his mother terribly, watching his parents' wedding video and joins him. After watching the video showcasing the best day of his life, Will cautiously asks Jamie if there's anything he has seen during Kate's attack, but soon drops the topic when the young boy solemnly answers that it was too dark to see anything. Then, after Jamie falls asleep, Will spends hours playing their voicemail over and over again, cherishing the sound of his beloved late wife. On the other side of the city, while working on the case in her apartment, Maggie receives a call from Peter, who informs her that Liam has called a meeting and reluctantly agrees to head to Peter's office. However, after the duo meets, Peter calls Liam numerous times, but fails to get an answer. After waiting a few minutes, Maggie proceeds to head back and is shocked to run into Will, who informs her that Liam is a cold-blooded killer who is responsible for the horrific murder of Sandra.
You said otherwise in court.
Well, I see things a little differently now. He is a murderer. There is not a doubt in my mind.
You and I differ on this point. I'm truly sorry for what happened to you, but this is the job.
You let that man in, you're risking everything. Don't make the same mistake. I mean it, don't be alone.
Don't say Will didn't warn you, Maggie. Maggie then returns to her apartment, is shocked to learn that someone had come looking for her, and has gone out of his way to empty her garbage bin for her. Terrified, Maggie cautiously enters her apartment, is relieved to find no one, but deep down knows exactly who had been there in her absence. The next day, with the help of Danny, Will discreetly meets with Trevor and tells him about the storage unit that was owned by Liam until 6 months before Sandra's murder, right after which it was transferred to Eileen. At the chambers, a disappointed Richards informs his team that the blood found at the crime scene was all Kate's, and the shoe print found rules out Liam. Then, just as the team loses hope and despairs about failing their brilliant colleague, who they know would have found a way to crack the case had he been allowed to work on it, Trevor rushes in with the news that Will had given him and repeats everything he said, word for word. Suddenly inspired, Richard orders Trevor to get a search warrant so that they can explore this new avenue of evidence as soon as possible, while Tara muses over Trevor's sudden transformation that has somehow made him the smartest man in the room. Elsewhere, a terrified Eileen, who had gotten a call from officers and is asked to repeat her earlier testimony, freaks out, fearing the worst, and rushes to speak to Liam, who assures her that everything will be okay as long as she manages to convincingly give her story. Then, unable to trust the nervous woman, Liam invites her to his house and proceeds to prepare her for the questions the barristers might ask her on the stand.
Oh, it's switched off at the wall.
Oh. Eileen, I want to protect you. As best I can, I really do.
Can you tell the court where you were on the evening of the 3rd of December?
Confungi.
Wrong.
I don't understand.
Have courage. Am I hurting you?
Meanwhile, at the chambers, Tara remembers seeing Will sneaking into his office a few weeks back, becomes more curious about Trevor's newfound exceptional legal skills, and knowing that Will's involvement will jeopardize the case, Trevor's career, and discredit their chambers, decides to investigate the matter. Hence, she follows Trevor to the mall, where he discreetly meets with Danny and Will, but is spotted by the trio before she can confirm her suspicions. Later, during the search of the storage facility, a size 12 boot is recovered, and even though it's too big to be Liam's size, the team hopes that it will match the prints from the crime scene and place Liam at the cottage. A few weeks later, on the first day of the trial, Will goes to Kate's grave. There, he emotionally recounts every single detail of the case, explains how loved she was, and that everyone is doing their ultimate best to get her some justice. Then, as if asking for her permission, Will shares his plan to go back to the cottage with Jamie for the first time since the tragedy and clean it out, hoping it will help his son deal with the loss. Hence, later, the duo drives to the cottage where they try to push out the horrific memory from their last visit and slowly go through each room, cleaning it out. However, a few hours later, Will's world is turned upside down once again when he finds the pregnancy test Kate had hidden as a surprise, and learns that not only had he lost his beloved wife on that fateful night, but also his unborn child. With his heart breaking all over again, Will starts crying his eyes out, which overwhelms Jamie, who doesn't know how to calm him down. Then, suddenly feeling enraged, Will rushes out of the cottage, and as the duo speeds back to the city, Will confronts his colleagues over the phone about his discovery, until he hears a shocking revelation.
It's my fault. I'm sorry. I should have tried again.
You scratched him with your hands.
And then I hid. I'm sorry.
Me too. And now I want you to explain to me exactly what happened.
Soon, Liam learns of this, freaks out, and heads to Peter's office, where he causes a scene demanding to speak to Maggie about the evidence that places him at the crime scene. Later, Maggie meets with Liam, manages to calm him down with her stoic demeanor, and convinces him that she's talented enough to be persuasive in the face of any evidence. A couple of days later in court, Will is called to give his testimony by the prosecution and identifies the defendant as the man he saw on his property on the night of the incident. As soon as the prosecution rests, Maggie starts cross-examining Will.
Mr. Burton, you are a practicing criminal defense barrister, are you not? Should the judge, in that situation, ask the jury to closely examine
I can list them for you if you like.
No, thank you. I'm more than capable of recalling them on my own.
I saw Liam Foyle.
You had no doubt whatsoever it was him.
Yes.
Is that right?
He's 9 years old. He was hiding in a box.
So, if I might ask again, is it your understanding that he was not able to identify the attacker? Were you under stress?
Is that a serious question? She was pregnant, did you know that?
Mr. Burton's distress cannot be avoided if my client is to be given a fair trial.
Very well, then.
But it wasn't that man, was it, Mr. Burton? You just wanted it to be.
If only you can channel this brilliance to a good cause, Maggie. Hammered by Maggie, who has certainly succeeded in planting seeds of doubt in the jury's mind about his testimony, Will rushes out of court to catch his breath and heads home. A couple of days later in court, the defense calls upon a forensic expert who reveals that a careful investigation of the DNA places Liam at the crime scene. Unfazed by the scientific explanation that ascertains that the DNA belonged to Liam without a shadow of doubt, Maggie begins questioning the doctor.
Why was the schedule brought forward? I noticed that your cleaning schedule is normally enacted on a clear and regulated basis, so...
Everyone's concerned about their failure rates. It's an industry-wide concern. But you can't answer. Yes.
DNA evidence is utterly compromised.
Then, Eileen is put on the stand, and as she's questioned about the boots found in her storage, she admits that the officers have, in fact, found a pair of boots in her other storage room, which strikes a nerve with Maggie, who argues that a search warrant had been issued to only search through the unit linked with Liam, and the defense had breached legal protocols by searching an additional unit. Conflicted, the judge excuses the jury, calls both sides of counsel to his chambers, and as he discusses the situation, Maggie sternly argues that the case lacks proper evidence and, to the outrage of the prosecution, convinces the judge to set Liam free and declare him not guilty. Delighted and pleasantly surprised by Maggie's ability to challenge seemingly condemning evidence, Liam smiles to himself and shakes her hand to show her his gratitude. Meanwhile, Finding himself on the other side of the law for the first time in his life, Will reflects on how easy it was for Maggie to manipulate the defense's weakness and the truth. Confronted with the fact that the justice he had always worked hard to uphold has failed him when he needed it the most, and once again, allowed a cold-blooded killer to walk free, Will rushes out of court, gets some fresh air, and wraps his head around everything. As he starts processing everything, Will can't help but feel guilty for defending the monster and unleashing him on society. Having lost his faith in the justice system and deeply burdened by the guilt he feels for Kate's and his unborn child's death, Will decides to take matters into his own hands and approaches Vadim, who he knows still maintains his criminal connections, and asks him for help. Glad to help the man that fought for his freedom, Vadim gets to work quickly, clones Liam's credit cards, hacks into Liam's personal files and history, learns all there's to know about him, and hands it over to Will. Moments later, Maggie arrives to talk to Will, is curious to see Vadim driving off and wondering what he's doing there, and approaches Will. Seemingly repentant about how aggressively she handled his wife's murder case, Maggie tries to explain that it was nothing personal, and she was just doing a job. No longer interested in what she has to say, Will quietly advises Maggie to be cautious and walks away. It's too late for apologies, Maggie. Disappointed, and with images of Kate's brutally murdered body flashing through her mind, Maggie returns to her apartment and is shocked to her core to find a gift box containing her special favorite brand of tea. Certain that Liam is behind the taunting gesture, Maggie wonders how he could have known such private information about her, and how he broke in without anyone seeing him. Terrified out of her mind, Maggie rushes to leave and spends the night elsewhere. In the next few days, hoping to get away from all the stress, Will takes Jamie to a cottage outside of town and spends a few days with him and Danny, who visits them there. One evening, while discussing the case with Danny, Will thanks him for everything he has done for him, turns down his offer to appeal the decision, and explains that there's no way to get ahead of Liam through the legal system. A few days later, Will bids farewell to Danny, Jamie, and his mother-in-law Mary, and heads to Edinburgh, where he interviews for a job and drives around town in the name of exploring the area and finding some residential properties. Then, Will tracks Liam to a local pub, from where he follows him to his remote property. There, Will quietly sneaks into the house but is soon discovered by Liam, who calmly begins taunting him. Ignoring all the annoying remarks, Will blatantly asks Liam why he killed his wife and demands to know details relating to her murder. Seeing through the barrister's ploy, Liam suddenly attacks Will, who quickly defends himself with his knife and, just like he expected, finds a recording device. Seemingly amused by Will's naive attempts to get him to confess to the crime on record, Liam continues taunting him.
When did you decide to kill my wife?
You and your brain. Wouldn't blame a lion for being a lion, would you, Will? Especially if you were the one who let him out. And do you think I'm a little bit stupid? How do you live with yourself?
Then, all of a sudden, seemingly having an allergic reaction, Liam starts to hyperventilate and struggles to breathe. Desperate for some relief, Liam summons all his courage and manages to ask Will to get his EpiPen and help him. However, Will remains frozen for a few minutes, stoically watching the life seeping out of the monster who has ruined his life, until he seemingly snaps out of his daze and frantically calls an ambulance. After dispatching the ambulance, the operator calmly guides Will on how to inject the EpiPen over the phone, and he cautiously follows the directions. However, before he can check if Liam is responding to the injection, Will is attacked by Liam, who has seized a moment of distraction to try and get the upper hand. As the men fight, an accidental fire breaks out, whose smoke soon knocks out the already struggling Liam. Seeing this, Will rescues Liam and gets him outside, just as the ambulance arrives and takes over his care. Forced by the EMTs to ride with them to the hospital, Will heads there, closely follows Liam's status, and watches on stoically as, despite the best efforts of the medical staff, he's soon pronounced dead. Later that day, given the history between him and the deceased, Will is arrested and taken into custody. As news of the arrest of the #1 barrister reaches the media, an old friend of Will rushes to the prison to help him out and informs him that instead of the 20 years imprisonment, she has worked out a plea deal for him to be sentenced to 9 years, and assures him that he can be out in 6 and watch his son finish school. Remaining calm for a person facing such grave charges, Will discards the reminder that it will be impossible for him to get a better deal in Scotland and opts to represent himself. Elsewhere, the shocking news reaches Maggie, who has a hard time believing the unexpected turn of events. As she reads more about the story, her mind goes back to the time she saw Will speaking to Vadim and starts to surmise that none of what happened is accidental, but instead a carefully laid out plot by a vengeful criminal barrister barrister who knows the criminal law inside out, hence determined to prove her theory. Maggie starts following Vadim around town and learns as much as she can about him. In Scotland, on the day of the trial, with Mary by his side, Jamie, who has still not recovered from the loss of his mother, sits in court shaking at the thought of losing another parent and crosses his little heart, desperately hoping to hear some good news. From the get-go, the judge treats Will sternly, smirks at his decision to represent himself, and starts proceedings. As its first witness, the prosecution calls for a doctor who describes Liam's injuries in detail, including the knife wound, which has been identified as the entry point for the allergen that caused the deceased to go into anaphylactic shock. To the surprise of the judge, Will turns down the opportunity to cross-examine the doctor. Then, Will takes a stand to make his case, and as the prosecution starts cross-examining him, he plays the audio recording of the call he made to the emergency services, who coached him on how to administer the EpiPen.
Oh yes, it's there. Is the patient responding?
You appeared to be very calm during this interaction. Were you?
I was trying to be. I had a job interview in Carlisle, and the person I spoke to suggested that I tour around a bit. Yes, I saw him in a pub, and I felt compelled to confront him.
You sought him out to force a confession, something that you would have desired very much.
Yes.
As you've said clearly in your statement...
Oh, yes. Before I carried him out of a burning building.
A specific kind of shellfish. Not exactly easy information to find out.
No, I did not access his files.
I believe his no was sufficient.
Then, after both sides make their case in detail, the prosecution makes a closing statement in which it urges the jury not to believe a word of Will's story, which seems too convenient, and instead focus on the history between him and the defendant and the evidence against him. After taking everything in, Will calmly waits for his turn and, as his colleague and family watch in great anticipation, presents a touching closing speech.
I have lived and believed in the law all my life. Is the man I know, beyond all doubt, murdered my wife. But make no mistake, I did those things out of nothing more than a sincere duty to our common decency. I risked my life to save the man who took away my heart. I faced him down with a knife in my hand. I could have let him burn, but you should not convict me of his murder.
Then, the judge dismisses the jury to deliberate, and while Will spends some time with his son Maggie, who has traveled all the way there, approaches him, pulls him aside, and shares that after spending days trying to figure out the case, she has finally succeeded. She then remarks that criminal barristers would have the know-how to commit the perfect crime and get away with it, and starts laying out her theory.
If they argue self-defense, they might load up a weapon with that allergen to administer the dose. Do you think it's possible to repurpose a pen as a poison pen? By replacing them, the emergency services taught them through administering that pen to the victim, then they'd be walking that person step by step through the murder. I'd be scared of getting caught.
You just said it was the perfect crime.
Oh, it is. Except for 3 things. Under additional observations, hidden away in the footnotes, risk of follow-up histology on local puncture site.
Well, I guess that depends.
On what?
On whether the body's been cremated.
Flabbergasted by Will's response, Maggie remains frozen and watches him walk away, seemingly shocked at the implication of their conversation, with which she cannot do anything. A few minutes later, to the utter joy of his colleagues and his son, the jury comes back with the verdict of not proven, and Will smiles as it's read out loud. With Kate's murder now gone and Will officially free, Mary, Will, and Jamie take some time to honor Kate's memory and, while holding her close to their heart, look forward to their future for the first time in months.